Capital Park and Planning Commission in Montgomery County Planning Department. He is the lead transportation planner for the Drive Montgomery 2050, and he has over 15 years of experience in the field. He has been with the Montgomery County Planning Department for more than 10 years, and he leads the department's multimodal transportation planning group. And our second speaker is Khalid Afzal. Khalid is a project manager at the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission in Montgomery County Planning Department. He's a project manager for the Thrive Montgomery 2050 General Plan, and he has more than 30 years of experience working in the fields of architecture and urban planning. Has been with the Montgomery County Planning Department for more than 20 years, working as a land use planner and an urban designer in both regulatory and long-term planning sections. David and Khalid will speak about Drive Montgomery 2050 General Plan today. So with that, David and Khalid, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Hong. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Khalid Afzal, Project Manager for Thrive Montgomery 2050, which is the update of the county's general plan. And thank you for the opportunity to give you a summary of the draft plan, which is currently at the planning board review stage. It's been finalized and we are getting ready to send it to the council. In the interest of time, we'll give you a quick overview of the main concepts and then a more detailed discussion about the transportation side of the plan. And then we'll be glad to answer any questions you may have. So we want to save the most time for the core presentation, which is about the transportation part of the general plan. Next slide, please. This slide shows you a summary of the trends and challenges the general plan should be addressing. We are a county of over 1 million people, and we are projected to have approximately 200,000 more people by 2045. And it's not just an increase in the number of people. We are also one of the most diverse places in the country, and we will be even more diverse in the future. Our household types have changed. The share of the older adult population is growing, along with many other demographic shifts we are experiencing. We are facing climate change, which will create new problems and exacerbate some of the existing ones. Technological innovations, economic competition, lifestyle changes, they're all disrupting the old patterns. And we need to re-examine how we live and work. At the same time, Montgomery County is at a stage where we have run out of what we call green land or farmland, open land, and we need to think differently about how we grow than we have been doing in the past, which has been, take up another farm, do a subdivision, extend roads and schools, and do that. We don't have the room for that anymore. Next slide, please. We identified early on in the planning process that we have 3 major outcomes that encompass and influence everything we should be considering as we plan for the county's future. These are all the major concepts of the proposed draft plan, namely economic health, community equity, and environmental resilience. We call them 3 major outcomes, 3 outposts, 3 goals, but basically they are the 3 pillars and guideposts for the future of the county and the plan to make sure that as we go about implementing the recommendations of the plan, we keep an eye on how these recommendations will help us achieve these 3 outcomes. Next slide, please. These are the major concepts that drive the detailed recommendations of the plan. Housing affordability at all income levels and family types is one of the biggest and toughest challenges. We know we need more housing of every size and type in all parts of the county. We want all future growth to be compact and near transit. Like I said, we're running out of land and we can't afford to just sprawl the way we have been doing in the past. Transit is a very big part of how we need to plan and grow because we cannot build enough roads to address the growing traffic. And increased driving also causes many other problems ranging from safety to more greenhouse gas emissions. And we want our communities to be more diverse and affordable to all segments of the population, to close the affordability gap and provide additional benefits such as social cohesion, um, connectivity, and walkability and ease of access. And we are calling this concept where we put all these things in the land use pattern, we're calling them complete communities. The general plan puts a lot of emphasis on healthy living through active lifestyle, which from a land use point of view means access to more parks and opportunities for walking and bicycling and relying less on private car for every short and long trip. And one other concept not listed here is the emphasis on design excellence, which is about the efficiency and quality of the built environment, meaning everything from smallest building and sidewalk to county and region-wide infrastructure and public and private facilities, and how the built environment contributes to the three main outcomes of the economic health, community equity, environmental resilience. And if, David, if you just click that, all these, again, every one of them influences as is and is influenced by the three major outcomes that we have identified. And without getting into more details about all these other concepts, I think I'll now hand it over to David to talk about the transportation recommendations of the plan. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Again, my name is David Anspacher. I am a transportation planner with the Montgomery County Planning Department. So thank you very much for having us today. As the title says here, the chapter in the general plan about transportation is called the Transportation and Communication Networks chapter, but I'm just going to be focusing on the transportation components of the chapter, as well as the transportation study we conducted in support of Thrive Montgomery. The chapters in Thrive Montgomery are divided into 4 sections. So first, each chapter describes the problems that they're trying to solve. Second, the chapters identify the policies that are going to solve those problems, and further, the key outcomes of Thrive Montgomery that Khalid went over. Third, they discuss how these policies and actions will solve the problems. And finally, they identify metrics that we can use to measure our progress in achieving and making sure that we achieve the key outcomes of the plan. The core transportation issue that Montgomery County and frankly most communities in the region are dealing with is that over the past 70 years, we have created an auto-oriented transportation system focused on speeding ever greater number of cars to destinations in the county and the region. Creation of this network was of course planned, and it occurred in tandem with the development of a low density and dispersed land use pattern. Year after year, we approved more sprawling growth and added more and more lanes for cars at the expense of space for walking, bicycling, dedicated lands for transit vehicles, street trees, and really anything that might slow down cars. So as a result, today we have an auto-oriented transportation system that funnels traffic to a limited number of high-speed roads, that disconnects communities, discourages walking, bicycling, and transit, and is just generally unsafe. And at the most basic level, this is shown in Montgomery County's commuting mode share, which today is about 70% by automobile. While we have certainly begun to reverse our auto-oriented practices, it's going to take many decades to have a substantial impact on travel patterns. So of course, this impacts the 3 core outcomes, again, of Thrive Montgomery that Khalid discussed: economic health, community equity, and environmental resilience. So regarding economic health, the lack of robust alternatives to driving and the inability to provide additional space for roads really leaves more and more commuters stuck in traffic and pushes jobs as well as people to other jurisdictions. As shown here, the average commute time in Montgomery County has increased from about 29 minutes in 1990 to about 35 minutes in 2016. And as a result, the county loses the residents, jobs, and tax revenue while simultaneously increasing traffic congestion as more people drive through the county on their way to jobs and homes in other places. A focus on automobile travel has meant that the county has a high rate of transportation-related severe injuries and fatalities. While our local data is somewhat limited on race and ethnicity, nationally we know that Hispanics and African Americans are much more likely than whites to be killed or severely injured in crashes. And this trend likely continues in Montgomery County as Hispanics and African Americans are more likely to live adjacent to high-speed roads and are more dependent on walking, bicycling, and transit. Hispanics and African Americans are also more likely to live in areas with higher vehicular emissions. Finally, our auto-oriented county means that transportation is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Our draft climate action plan that's working its way through the review process right now estimates that about 42% of greenhouse gas emissions are generated by the transportation sector in Montgomery County. To solve these challenges, we have identified 3 broad areas for policy interventions. I'm going to walk through each of these, but they're to develop a safe, comfortable, and irresistible network for walking, bicycling, and rolling. It's not good enough to be safe and comfortable. We really need to make it, just irresistible. People want to do these things. We need to build a world-class transit system, and we need to adapt policies to reflect the economic and environmental costs of driving alone. So to develop a safe, comfortable, and irresistible network for walking, biking, and rolling, we will expand the street grid in downtowns, town centers, along transit corridors, and in our suburban centers of activity to create shorter blocks. We'll stop planning or constructing new highways or major road widenings for cars. We would repurpose existing traffic lanes and on-street parking to create space for walking, bicycling, street trees, etc. And we'd prioritize the provision of safe, comfortable, and attractive sidewalks, bikeways, and roadway crossings through our capital program and development approvals. And finally, transform the road network by incorporating complete streets design principles with the goal of eliminating all transportation-related fatalities and severe injuries. To build a world-class transit system, we would build a network of rail, bus rapid transit, and local bus infrastructure and services that make transit the fastest, most convenient, and most reliable way to travel to centers of economic, social, and educational activity and opportunities. We'd convert existing general purpose traffic lanes to dedicated transit lanes. We'd connect historically disadvantaged people in parts of the county to jobs, amenities, and services by prioritizing investments and in increasing access to frequent and reliable all-day transit service. And we'd ensure safe and comfortable access to transit stations by way of walking, rolling, and bicycling. Finally, to adapt policies to reflect the economic and environmental costs of driving alone, we would employ pricing mechanisms such as congestion pricing or the collection and allocation of tolls to support walking, rolling, bicycling, and transit. We'd manage parking more efficiently by charging market rates and reducing the supply of public and private parking, and encourage the proliferation of non-polluting vehicles by upgrading government fleets and requiring appropriate infrastructure that benefits everybody. This is very ambitious, obviously. It's going to take a lot of work to implement, but we wanted to set our sights high. So next, the chapter explains how our policies are going to reverse decades of auto-focused design and dependence by making walking, bicycling, and transit irresistible. These policies support economic health by offering residents and employees a menu of choices that make all forms of travel effortless and enjoyable, provide reliable travel times, and redevelop parking lots to more productive uses. They will improve the equity of our transportation system by providing world-class walking, bicycling, and transit networks that will increase access to jobs and other opportunities, eliminating pollutants from our vehicles, and by converting high-speed suburban arterials to safe and comfortable multimodal boulevards. And they will enhance environmental resilience by providing, again, irresistible alternatives to driving and by reflecting the environmental cost of driving to reduce vehicle miles traveled while constructing a fine-grained grid of streets. And finally, the chapter has a list of indicators that we can use to determine if the county is making progress in achieving the key outcomes of Thrive Montgomery. The list I've shown here presents some very high-level indicators, but as part of our biennial transportation monitoring report, we will need to delve deeper into evaluating our progress. So the second item I wanted to share with you is the results of the transportation analysis that was conducted in support of Thrive Montgomery. But first, I wanted to acknowledge the contributions of Fair and Peers DC, which conducted the analysis in the report, and especially to Alex Rixey and his team. for all their help. The Thrive Montgomery transportation analysis sought to answer two questions. First, how could the county be impacted by national and global trends that we cannot control related to the economy, climate change, demographics, technology, and lifestyle choices? And do these trends support the county's vision for the future, or are policy interventions needed to achieve the county's vision? To address these questions, the analysis evaluated several metrics that we think capture many of the county's transportation values. It relies on the use, of course, of the county's regional travel demand forecasting model, so it looks at things like vehicle miles traveled, job access, and travel times. Our approach first evaluates how external factors outside of the county's control could impact the county's transportation future. And to do so, we used what is called an alternatives future framework to conduct our analysis. The analysis then evaluates how several of the recommendations in Thrive Montgomery could help the county achieve its transportation vision by improving those metrics. So just a quick overview of alternative futures. Travel demand forecasting models are the traditional approach that transportation planners use to understand future conditions. While these models incorporate changes to land use and transportation, they often do not account for the drivers of change shown at the bottom of the slide that can greatly impact how we travel. These drivers of change include, again, economic disruptions, climate change, demographic changes, technological innovations, and changes in lifestyles. A business as usual approach to understanding future conditions has utility for many types of analysis, but it is less appropriate for a general plan that seeks to prepare Montgomery County to adapt to a rapidly changing world. With the potential for mass adoption of autonomous vehicles and teleworking, or flooding and extreme temperature fluctuations, the county's travel patterns in 30 years may not reflect past trends. Therefore, in addition to evaluating a business as usual future, that is the future that can be expected if the region continues to grow and change along its current path, the transportation analysis for Thrive Montgomery also evaluates for alternative futures that include fundamental changes to how people travel. Alternative futures are plausible futures and incorporate a range of changes that could occur in Montgomery County and in the region between today and 2050. They're not scenarios we're picking among, they're simply different futures that could occur depending on how things pan out in the world. The alternative futures were initially defined by two factors, technological innovation and economic disruptions. So technology either increased travel due to autonomous vehicles or decreased travel due to teleworking and e-commerce. Additionally, economic disruptors either led to economic growth fueled by outside business attraction, such as large multinational corporations, or by organic growth and entrepreneurship, defined by smaller businesses. The four alternatives are listed here, and they're given names that were intended to capture the essential characteristics. Their essential characteristics and include different combinations of technological innovations and economic disruptions, and they are on the road, work local, play local, home alone together, and hello from the other side. After conducting some initial analysis, we found that the on the road and home alone together scenarios generally bookended the analysis. That is, they show the range of impacts from greatest to least, and that business as usual is generally in the middle. So we dropped hello from the other side and work local, play local from our analysis and focused just on evaluating business as usual on the road and the home alone together scenarios. Before we go through the analysis, I wanted to walk you through the narratives behind the two alternative futures we carried forward. The characteristics of each are defined based on their differences from the business as usual scenario. So for example, the on the road scenario is very much a future where people are driving more and making longer trips. Due to technological innovations that make travel easier, such as autonomous vehicles, the average household is assumed to make 25% more trips than in the business as usual scenario. Due to economic disruptions and how we grow, economic growth is very much focused on a few large industries such as biotech. These industries are much more concentrated in specific locations in the region, so people have to travel further to get to jobs that align with their skill sets. People prefer to live in less dense locations, which are not as accessible to high quality transit as urban areas, and travel by transit, walking or bicycling is less desirable. And all development is assumed to be removed from the 500-year floodplain due to flooding. As a result, traffic congestion increases substantially in this scenario. The home alone together scenario is on the opposite end of the spectrum and is very much a future where people live in denser locations and travel less. Due to technological innovations that make teleworking and e-commerce more feasible and therefore reduce the need to leave our homes, the average household makes 25% fewer trips than in the business as usual scenario. Due to economic disruptions and how we grow, economic growth is very much focused on smaller, homegrown industries. These industries are concentrated in areas with existing office jobs, but contain a wide variety of skill sets, so people don't have to travel as far to get to work. People prefer to live in more dense locations, which are accessible to high quality transit. And so travel by transit, walking and bicycling is more feasible. And as with the on the road scenario, all development is assumed to be removed from the 500-year floodplain. And as a result of all this, traffic congestion drops somewhat in this scenario. So after we established the future conditions we wanted to evaluate, we developed the metrics and modeling approaches to understand each. We identified the policies in Thrive Montgomery that we thought would have the greatest impact on improving our metrics and that could be tested in the travel demand model. So these included a few changes to land use, but the major change being that we would focus 95% of new growth along planned rail and BRT corridors. And we made a number of transportation changes to the model listed here. We assumed that dedicated transit ways would be created by repurposing existing traffic lanes and that BRT corridors would have a maximum of 4 general purpose lanes running along them. That bus rapid transit service would be implemented on the 9 corridors identified in the county's master plans with 5-minute headways. The headways on the red line would be reduced by about 20%. That the Mark Brunswick line would have 2-way service throughout the day, extending to Alexandria, and that headways would be reduced to 30 minutes. That the frequency of local bus service would be doubled, that the cost of traveling by automobile and parking would be substantially increased, and that a grid of streets would be built out in downtowns, town centers, and along our BRT corridors. Next, we identified a number of metrics to evaluate. And they can generally be grouped into 5 categories. So general metrics, such as the number of person trips and vehicle trips. Non-auto driver mode share is a metric that, as far as I know, only Montgomery County uses, but reflects the share of person trips made by non-drivers. So people walking, biking, taking transit, or that are passengers in a car. Vehicle miles traveled, travel time, which of course measures the time spent traveling by auto or transit. And then job access is the average number of jobs that can be reached from different areas of the county within a 45-minute travel time. We also conducted an equity analysis using the equity emphasis areas developed by MWCOG. So this analysis looks at whether there are disparities between equity emphasis areas and non-equity emphasis areas in our metrics. And just a word of caution here about this analysis. It assumes that equity areas will remain where they are today, which of course may not be the case, but still does give us some useful understanding of the disparities that are likely to persist for many years. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the evaluation of each metric, but I will walk through a few of them. There's a lot of information on these slides, so I'm just going to quickly break it down for you. At the top of the slide, we identify the metric. In this case, it's average person trips per weekday. On the right side of the slide, highlighted in yellow, we identify the existing condition for the metric as estimated in 2015. So in 2015, there were an average of 3.2 million person trips per weekday in Montgomery County. The bulk of the slide is the graph. Across the top, you see how external factors and Thrive Montgomery policies impact the metric. And in addition, we show the total change. So external factors plus Thrive Montgomery policies result in the total change. Therefore, for the blue bars showing the impacts of the on the road scenario, a 57% change due to external factors plus a 13% change due to Thrive Montgomery policies leads to a 70% change overall in average person trips per weekday compared to the 2050 baseline. The colors represent the impact of each alternative future. Blue represents, again, the impact of the on the road scenario. Red is the business as usual scenario, and then green is the home alone together scenario. So in 2015, and about 2.3 million vehicle trips were made in Montgomery County during a typical weekday. External factors result in as much as a 37% increase in vehicle trips in the on-the-road scenario, and a reduction of up to 5% of vehicle trips in the home alone together scenario. This is a big range. This impact on vehicle trips is very similar to what I just showed for person trips, and is a result of population growth and due to our trip generation assumptions. The effect of Thrive Montgomery policy measures is to decrease the number of vehicle trips by between 2% in home alone together and 10% in the business as usual scenarios. This shows that our policies are having positive impacts. Pricing mechanisms that increase the cost of driving, encourage people to leave their cars at home, while more dense land uses, transit investments and improvements to non-motorized travel make walking, bicycling, and transit more attractive. Still, there's a wide range in potential outcomes by 2050. The combined effect of external factors and Thrive Montgomery policies could increase vehicle trips by as much as 33%, though they could also decrease as much as 7% relative to 2015. This suggests the need for stronger policies if we want to ensure vehicle trip reductions. Vehicle miles traveled, of course, represents the total daily miles traveled by automobiles. VMT can serve, of course, as a proxy for greenhouse gas emissions and air quality. In 2015, VMT for trips that start or end in Montgomery County was estimated to be a little over 20 million miles per day. Absent policy interventions, VMT growth in the business as usual future is expected to be about 19%, mirroring population growth. Due to increased number of vehicle trips in the on-the-road scenario that we just saw, VMT growth would be about 42%. VMT would actually decrease a bit for the home alone together scenario because of the reductions in vehicle trips. Thrive Montgomery policies would decrease VMT by between 4 and 6%. These results are very similar to the impact on vehicle trips. A reduction of this amount might seem small, but compared to impacts of transportation policies on projects that we typically see, it's a solid step in the right direction. This results in an overall growth of VMT of between 37% in on the road and a reduction of 7% in home alone together relative to 2015. And as we saw with the results for vehicle trips, we believe this suggests the needs for even stronger policies if we want to ensure a reduction in VMT over time. Travel time measures time spent traveling by auto or transit. For transit trips, which I'm going to focus on here, it includes the walk to the station, the wait time for the transit vehicle to arrive, the travel time in the vehicle, and the walk to the destination. In 2015, the average travel time per transit trip was about 50 minutes in Montgomery County. The impact of external factors is minimal and ranges from about 2% increase to a slight decrease of about 4% in the home alone together scenario. Thrive Montgomery policies will reduce average transit travel times by about 3 to 4% overall for all forms of transit. One of the policy assumptions we made was that buses in transit would arrive much more frequently than they do today. That wait times would decrease by half. This alone should have resulted in about a 5% decrease in the average travel time for existing trips. And other policies such as dedicated transit lanes should have reduced travel times further, but that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing travel time decrease of only about 3 to 4%. So our hypothesis is that travel times from one point to another are in fact much shorter, but that we only see a slight reduction in travel time because while individual trips are becoming shorter, longer distance trips are becoming more attractive and people are taking more of them. But overall, average travel time per transit trip decreases as much as 7% for home alone together relative to 2015. Job access is the average number of jobs that can be reached from different areas in the county within a 45-minute travel time by either driving or transit, but I'm going to again focus on transit. In 2015, only about 12% of all jobs in Montgomery County could be accessed by transit within 45 minutes. External factors have a slight impact, ranging from an increase of 5% in the home alone together scenario to a reduction of 2% in business as usual. For on the road, the greater concentration of jobs and locations that are more transit accessible more than offsets the higher levels of congestion, while in home loan together, the increase is likely due to both a greater concentration of jobs and locations that are more transit accessible and lower levels of congestion. Thrive Montgomery policies increase access to jobs by between 5% in home loan together and 11% in business as usual. And overall, access to Montgomery County jobs by transit increases by about 10% relative to 2015. So there are a few key takeaways from the study and future policy changes that may need to be considered as we move to implement Thrive Montgomery in the coming years. First, in a rapidly changing world, it's impossible, of course, to predict our transportation futures. We could end up in many different places. After all, many of us probably didn't anticipate 2 years ago that we would all, many of us would at least would be teleworking. So it's critical to create a general plan that is nimble enough to respond to the uncertainties of the future. The way we have gone about this is to try to focus on articulating the county's values in Thrive Montgomery instead of a very detailed list of policies. And I guess, and leave it really to follow-up efforts to figure out how to make the broad policies a reality. Time will, of course, tell if we got that right, but we have metrics to show if the policies are successful or whether a change of course is needed. Second, as we have described, the recommendations in Thrive Montgomery are high level. And so with or without this transportation study, the transportation chapter in the plan likely would have ended up with similar recommendations. Still, the study is very valuable in demonstrating the need for the policy recommendations in the plan that are, that many of them are going to be challenging to implement. Third, the result for the transportation analysis are encouraging in many regards, as they show that the proposed land use and transportation policies in Thrive Montgomery have the ability to bend the curve in the growth of VMT, to increase access to local jobs via transit, and to decrease driving alone. Still, the results appear to largely be offsetting the impacts of growth, and additional policies will be needed over the coming years to further achieve our metrics. Three policies that stand out as having the greatest potential to further improve transportation metrics include additional land use changes, teleworking, and travel and parking pricing. Perhaps the most significant reason that the results do not show even more progress toward achieving the county's goals is related to the county's land use, particularly its housing patterns. Thrive Montgomery would build from many, many years of successes of past planning efforts, especially the master plans in Montgomery County focused on redeveloping around transit stations by shifting almost all future growth to existing downtowns, town centers, and transit corridors. This policy would initially seem to have a bigger impact, but the impact will in fact be limited because it doesn't propose to significantly change existing suburban land uses. Of the over 200,000 new residents anticipated by 2050, only about 50,000 or about a quarter of the growth would be shifted to our downtowns, town centers, and transit corridors from suburban areas of the county. And that is because over half of new residents are already expected to reside in these areas, and 1/4 are expected to reside in municipalities outside of Montgomery County's planning authority, specifically Rockville and Gaithersburg. Therefore, the policies in Thrive Montgomery may affect as little as 4% of the total 1.2 million Montgomery County residents anticipated by 2050. In many ways, the transportation outcomes over the next 30 years are going to continue to be directly attributable to the land use decisions of the past, as the location of 96% of the county's residential units and jobs are not expected to be shifted by Thrive Montgomery. Therefore, to move closer to achieving our goals, an additional focus may be needed on policies to shift existing population and jobs from suburban communities to downtowns, town centers, and transit corridors. While policies to encourage teleworking were considered during the development of Thrive Montgomery, at the time the alternative futures were developed for this report, they were not expected to contribute substantially to achieving the county's goals. But of course, COVID-19 has shown the great potential that teleworking and e-commerce have to reduce VMT. The results of the recent survey of employers by COG in the region found that 55% shifted to full-time teleworking during the pandemic. Additionally, more than half of employers anticipate a post-pandemic telework level that is higher than the pre-pandemic telework level, including 20% that anticipate continuing to telework at a level experienced during the pandemic. So in effect, the county might find itself closer to the Home Alone Together results for 2050, which was generally found to be more likely to move the county towards its transportation goals. So as the county is starting to get control, as the country really is starting to get control over COVID-19 and more people revert to their pre-COVID travel patterns, Montgomery County will need to pursue an effort to maintain an elevated level of telework. Certainly not, the level that we're experiencing today, but increased from pre-pandemic levels, while also seeking to offset, of course, some of the negative economic and social impacts of teleworking. The transportation analysis evaluates the impacts of increasing the cost of travel by automobile and parking. The policies could take several forms, including a charge on VMT, congestion pricing. To model these policies, the assumption was that the cost of driving and parking would double from what it would otherwise be expected to be. Future studies will need to determine the extent to which the impact of these policies could be strengthened with higher charges. We sort of we didn't have a ton to go on when we put these assumptions in the model, and so we'll need to refine that over the coming years. So that concludes our presentation on Thrive Montgomery, and looks like we have about 20 minutes for any questions that people have.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Kali. Thank you for the great presentation. So I think it was very meaningful to learn about the Montgomery County's perspectives and approach to build a safer, more comfortable and irresistible network for pedestrians and transit users. I think we are a bit ahead of our schedule, so that's good. I've had several questions that came in. I'm just gonna go through them in the order. So one that came in was from Dan Hardy. So great looking plan. I seem to recall that back in the Forever Green days a decade ago, the soundbite was 4% of land available for development. Now it looks like 15% per figure two. Curious about what went into the newer messaging. And I think the figure two is, I think that relates to the slide number 10, David.